I said, bring me the chocolate souffle. Jaden's voice was calm, but his gaze was cold. Lauren crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, as if deciding whether to even respond. I'm sorry, but it's sold out. Her tone was deliberately polite, but her eyes gleamed with barely concealed disdain. Jaden slowly turned his head, scanning the cabin. 2 rows ahead, a flight attendant was just placing a fresh, perfectly made chocolate souffle in front of Mr. Goldstein. He turned back to Lauren. Sold out? He repeated slowly, enunciating each word. Lauren held his gaze and gave a small shrug. Unfortunately, yes. At that moment, the businessman sitting across the aisle quietly shook his head. He had seen the same thing Jaden had. Is there anything else I can do for you? Lauren asked, this time not even bothering to hide her smug smile. Jaden leaned back in his seat, letting the silence stretch between them. No, Miss Reed, not yet. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and began typing something. Lauren smirked. Just another rich passenger who thought his whims actually mattered. She had no idea that with a single tap, he could change her life forever. Not yet, but very soon. The best part is yet to come. Stay with us to find out how it all ends. And in the meantime, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss it. The private jet gleamed in the morning sun, its sleek frame reflecting the golden light, promising passengers a journey of luxury. Jaden Smith stood at the side of the steps, watching as his airline's wealthy clients boarded. He was only 26 years old, but the weight of responsibility for the empire he had inherited and vastly expanded was palpable in his every move. Michael, make sure no one knows I'm here, Jaden said, adjusting his simple but perfectly tailored dark blue suit with no recognizable logo. Everything is ready, Mr. Smith. Your ticket is registered in the name of James Carter. No one on board will know who you really are. It's time to find out what happens on my planes when I'm not around. With that, he headed toward the steps, blending in with the other passengers. His gait was confident, but not conspicuous. He wasn't the Jaden Smith featured on the covers of business magazines. Today, he was just another wealthy customer looking for a comfortable flight. Lauren Reed, the senior flight attendant, stood at the entrance to the plane, her immaculate uniform and perfectly coiffed hair projecting an air of professionalism. She greeted each passenger with a practiced smile that grew warmer or colder depending on how the person entering looked. Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond. Her voice was soft, almost intimate, as she addressed the elderly couple in expensive designer clothes. So nice to see you again. Jaden watched the exchange from a little way back. When it was his turn, he felt an immediate change in the atmosphere. Lauren's eyes slid over him, lingering on his plain suit with no luxury brand markings. Her smile became strained, and her voice lost its warmth. Welcome, she said dryly, barely meeting his eyes before turning her attention to the next passenger. He settled into his chair, taking out a nondescript diary instead of the latest smartphone he usually used. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaden saw Lauren usher a very important client to his seat, her face aglow with helpfulness. The client was a well-known investor whose net worth was smaller than Jaden's own, but whose outward trappings of wealth were far more visible. Mr. Goldstein, your favorite champagne is already cooling. May I offer you something before takeoff? Jaden made a mental note of this selective care. His airline, Smith Air, was positioned to provide the highest level of service to all passengers, not just a select few. A young flight attendant named Grace, judging by her badge, walked past carrying trays of drinks. Excuse me, Jaden said to her. Can I get a glass of water? Of course, sir. Just a second. She returned almost instantly, handing him water on a silver tray. Here you go. If you need anything, just let me know. Jaden nodded his thanks, noting the difference in attitude between the two flight attendants. He took a sip of water, watching the cabin slowly fill up. A striking woman in a designer suit, smelling of expensive perfume, sat down next to him. She gave him an appraising look, which quickly lost interest when it revealed no signs of exceptional wealth. Across the aisle sat a quiet, middle-aged businessman who, unlike many, did not flaunt his status, but his confidence spoke of inner strength. He met Jaden's eyes and nodded slightly in greeting. Lauren reappeared in the cabin, handing out welcome drinks. She moved from one VIP passenger to the next, offering champagne, whiskey, and fancy cocktails. When she reached Jaden, she simply walked past him as if his seat was empty. Sorry, Jaden said loud enough for them to hear. Yes? I didn't get a welcome drink, Jaden said calmly. We serve drinks in order of priority. I'll get back to you later. With that, she walked away, even though she had already finished serving all the other passengers in his row. The woman next to Jaden gave him a condescending look, as if he had made a grave mistake by daring to remind them of himself. The businessman across the aisle, however, frowned, clearly noticing the injustice. The plane began to taxi to the runway. The captain announced the imminent takeoff and the expected flight duration. Jaden leaned back in his seat, mentally recording every detail of what was happening. His company spent millions on training staff, creating impeccable service. But what he saw was at odds with the stated standards. After takeoff and reaching cruising altitude, Lauren began handing out menus for lunch. She stopped at each seat, explaining in detail the specials and chef's recommendations. When it was Jaden's turn, she casually tossed the menu onto his table. Jaden slowly flipped through the menu, checking off each item. This was the same menu he had personally approved months ago, working with a renowned chef. He knew how much effort had gone into creating this culinary experience. "Excuse me, could you tell me more about the wine list?" "Of course, sir. We have a great selection. For the main course, I would recommend this Cabernet. It will complement the steak perfectly." Her sincere desire to help contrasted with Lauren's coldness. Jaden thanked Grace after making his choice. As he surveyed the cabin, Jaden noticed Lauren paying special attention to a few passengers, those who were recognizable or ostentatiously wealthy. For the rest, her services were minimal and unenthusiastic. It was precisely the kind of division he hoped not to see on board his planes. After a while, Lauren began serving dinner. She moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, but her smile and friendliness were carefully measured depending on the passenger status. When she reached Jaden, she placed the plate in front of him without a word, not even looking at him. Jaden took a deep breath, keeping his cool. He wasn't going to make a scene, at least not yet. His goal was to see the full picture of the service before taking any action. During lunch, a woman sitting next to Lauren began talking about an upcoming fashion event in New York. A man a few rows away, a well-known media mogul, interrupted their conversation. "Lauren, my dear, do you remember my request for a special dessert?" he called out. "Of course, Mr. Hutton," Lauren exclaimed, instantly shifting her attention. "I personally made sure the chef prepared it for you." Jaden noted this exception to the standard menu, a practice he disapproved of unless it was extended to all passengers with special requests. When dessert arrived, Jaden discovered that he had not received what he had ordered. Instead of a chocolate souffle, he had a simple panna cotta in front of him. "Excuse me," he said to Grace as she passed by. "I ordered a chocolate souffle." "Sorry, sir. I'll check it out." "I'm very sorry, but the kitchen said that the souffle is gone." It was odd, Jaden thought, because he had just seen Lauren serve the chocolate souffle to another passenger who had ordered after him. But he simply thanked Grace for checking. "Are you finished?" He nodded, and she took the plate away without even asking if he liked the dish or if he would like anything else. Although she asked these questions of other passengers. The man across the aisle watching the scene shook his head and caught Jaden's eye. His eyes were filled with understanding and disapproval of the flight attendant's actions. With most of the passengers dozing off or immersed in their devices, Jaden decided to take a walk around the cabin. At the back of the plane, he spotted Grace laying out fresh towels. "How long have you been with Smith Air?" he asked casually. "A little over a year, sir," she replied with a slight smile. "And what do you think?" "I love my job. The company, it has a great reputation." "But, Grace, what are you doing? You have a job." The young flight attendant winced and quickly apologized to Jaden before returning to her duties. "Can I help you with something?" Passengers are advised not to stand in the aisle. "I was just stretching my legs," Jaden replied calmly. "There is enough space for that by your chair," she snapped. "Please return to your seat." Her tone was downright commanding, as if she were addressing a disobedient child rather than an adult who had paid for a first-class ticket. Jaden noticed how the other passengers moved about the cabin without any such reaction. He returned to his seat, his resolve only strengthened. This flight was showing him more than he had expected to see. Not just isolated incidents of discrimination, but a culture of unequal treatment that was likely thriving across his entire airline. As the plane descended to land, Jaden noticed Lauren handing out hot towels to passengers. When she reached his row, she served the woman next to him, then simply moved on to the next passenger, completely ignoring Jaden. "Excuse me," he said. "Can I have a towel too? We have a limited number. If there is anything left, I will come back." She knew as well as Jaden that there were always more than enough towels on board for all first-class passengers. "Take mine. I won't use it." "Thank you," Jaden replied with a grateful nod. Lauren noticed the gesture, and her face twisted in annoyance for a moment, but she quickly regained her professional expression, although her eyes betrayed her true feelings. After landing, as passengers prepared to leave, Jaden watched as Lauren said goodbye to each of them. For the VIPs, she had warm words and promises to wait for them on the next flight. For everyone else, a routine smile and a short goodbye. Reaching Jaden, she simply nodded without saying a word and turned her attention to the next passenger. Jaden looked back at the plane he had just left. His calm face now reflected a steely determination. What he had seen today could not continue. Not in his company, not under his name. "Michael," he said quietly but with unshakable confidence, "I want a list of the passengers on this flight and the full crew. And contact control. I'm flying back with them in 3 hours." "Yes, sir. Is something wrong?" "Not yet, but it will happen soon." He could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, a device that could change the fate of someone like Lauren in an instant. One word, one call, and her career would be over. But Jaden was in no hurry. He wanted to see more, to understand the full picture of what was happening on board his planes. "You look tense." "I'm fine," Jaden said, though there was steel in his voice. "Just making sure our return flight was necessary. Some people need to be taught a lesson in true equality." As they walked through the terminal, Jaden spotted Lauren chatting with the crew captain. She was laughing, completely relaxed, unaware that the man she had so scornfully served held her professional future in his hands. Jaden allowed himself a small smile. The second act of this drama promised to be much more interesting than the first. 3 hours, Michael," he said. "I want to be on the same plane, with the same crew." "Everything will be ready, sir," Michael nodded, starting to dial a number on his phone. Jaden glanced at his watch. Lauren and her team had 3 hours before their world would be turned upside down. They didn't know it yet, but today would be the point of no return for them, especially for Lauren, who would soon learn the true cost of her arrogance and prejudice, and that cost would be very, very high. 3 hours passed quickly. Jaden Smith returned to the airport, where the same plane was already being prepared for its return flight. This time, he chose a more prominent seat. Seat 1B, right in the center of the first row. A seat that was impossible to ignore. "Everything is ready, sir," Michael said quietly, handing him the boarding pass. "The crew is the same. I informed the control about your incognito. No one knows you will be on board." "Fine. Continue to keep my identity a secret. I want to see how far this can go." "Are you sure this is necessary? We could just—" "It is necessary," Jaden answered firmly. "I will not make decisions based on one incident. I need the full picture." He headed toward the gate, where passengers were already lined up. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaden spotted Lauren and Grace standing at the check-in counter. Lauren looked confident and relaxed, chatting with another flight attendant and occasionally casting appraising glances at the passengers. Grace stood a little to the side, maintaining a professional smile, but with a reserved stance. As Jaden walked past them toward the ramp, Lauren glanced at him with an indifferent expression, but then her expression changed as she recognized the passenger she had been in conflict with. For a moment, worry flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a look of cold determination. She leaned toward her colleague, whispering something in her ear. She glanced briefly at Jaden and nodded. Jaden boarded the ship, mentally preparing himself for the journey ahead. He wasn't looking for a confrontation, but he was prepared for one if the situation called for it. On the plane, Jaden took his place at the center of attention. Passengers gradually filled the cabin, and among them he noticed a familiar face, the same businessman who had shown solidarity during the previous flight. The man nodded at Jaden, as if a silent understanding had formed between them. "Cherie, Mr. Goldstein, how nice to see you back on our flight. Ms. Donovan, you look stunning today." "Welcome aboard," she said mechanically, and quickly turned away without waiting for an answer. Jaden noted how she pointedly avoided further contact with him, while simultaneously showing marked concern for the other passengers. This was not just an incidental episode, it was a deliberate pattern of behavior. As the plane taxied to the runway, Lauren gave the standard safety briefing. Her gaze slid over the passengers, deliberately avoiding Jaden. Once the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, she began making her way around the cabin with drinks, lingering with each passenger, making friendly conversation, and offering a wide selection. "What will you drink?" she asked sharply, without even looking him in the eye. "Mineral water, please," Jaden answered calmly. "Sir, may I offer you our signature cocktail? It is simply delicious." Jaden dabbed at his sleeve with his handkerchief, keeping a straight face. A businessman a few rows away noticed and shook his head in disapproval. About an hour into the flight, Jaden decided to see how far this discrimination could go. He pressed the button to call a flight attendant. The light came on, but no one came. 5 minutes later, he pressed it again. 5 minutes later, Grace showed up. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. "I'd like a pillow if possible," Jaden replied. "Of course, sir. I'll bring it now." "Here you go. Anything else?" "No, thank you, Grace," Jaden replied, deliberately calling her by name. Lauren, noticing the scene from across the room, walked over to Grace as soon as she moved away from Jaden's chair. "What are you doing?" Jaden heard her whisper. "I told you to take care of that passenger." But he's been waiting for 10 minutes, Grace said quietly. I just brought him a pillow. You should be focusing on your section, Lauren snapped. I'll deal with this. Gentlemen. She said the last word with barely concealed contempt. Grace looked unsure but nodded and went off to attend to other duties. Choose what you want, she said dryly and turned away without waiting for his answer. I chose a steak, medium rare. We only serve well-done steaks, Lauren snapped, though Jaden knew from his experience as a business owner that this wasn't true. In that case, I'll take the salmon, he answered calmly. We're out of salmon, she countered, even though she had just taken an order for salmon from the passenger across the row. Then what can you offer? We have vegetarian pasta. Okay, I'll have some pasta, Jaden agreed. As the food began to be served, Jaden noticed that his meal was distinctly different from what the other passengers had received. While the others were served elaborate dishes with side dishes and sauces, his pasta looked like a hastily prepared economy-class meal. He took a few spoonfuls. The pasta was cold and oversalted, clearly intentionally spoiled. Jaden put his fork down and waited calmly for Lauren to pass by. Is there something wrong with your food? She asked with false concern, noticing that he had barely touched his dish. Yeah, it's cold and oversalted, Jaden replied evenly. Unfortunately, I can't help you. The other dishes are gone. Excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute? Yes, Mr. Anderson? I overheard your conversation, he said. I was served a medium steak, although I did not ask for it. Perhaps this gentleman would prefer it to cold pasta. It's not quite according to protocol. I insist, Mr. Anderson said firmly. If you cannot provide this passenger with proper food, I am prepared to share mine. Several other passengers were now watching the scene with interest. Lauren found herself in the awkward position of being seen as openly discriminatory in front of other customers. I'll check in the kitchen, she finally squeezed out and quickly left. 5 minutes later, she returned with a plate of perfectly cooked steak and silently placed it in front of Jaden. Her face was tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. Thank you, Jaden said with a slight smile. Lauren didn't respond and quickly walked away. Jaden exchanged glances with Mr. Anderson, who gave him a small nod of solidarity. After lunch, the cabin was in a semi-slumber. Many passengers were watching movies or dozing. Jaden decided to get up and stretch a bit, heading toward the toilet at the front of the plane. Kono, I don't understand why he keeps flying with us if he doesn't like the service so much. People like him always create problems by trying to get more than they paid for. Jaden walked past, not letting on that he had heard the conversation. The words made him rage inside, but he kept his cool on the outside. These weren't the values he had built his company by. This wasn't the way people should be treated. As he walked back to his seat, Jaden accidentally kicked a bag in the aisle that belonged to one of the passengers who had carelessly left it there. He carefully moved the bag under his seat and continued walking. At that moment, Lauren came out of the kitchen with a tray full of glasses of water. When she saw Jaden, she deliberately changed her trajectory, heading straight for him. When they passed each other in the narrow passage, she turned sharply and the tray tipped. Several glasses toppled over, splashing water all over Jaden's pants and shirt. Oh my God, Lauren exclaimed with mock horror. You need to watch where you're going. You knocked over my tray. See what you've done? Now I'll have to clean everything up and make the drinks all over again. I didn't touch your tray. You changed direction on purpose. How dare you blame me, Lauren protested, raising her voice even more, clearly trying to attract the attention of the other passengers. You always create problems. First with the food, now this. The passengers began to whisper. Some looked at Jaden with disapproval, believing Lauren's version. Others, including Mr. Anderson and an elderly couple sitting nearby, looked worried, clearly seeing the unfairness of this. Let me help you, sir, she said, handing Jaden the towels and casting a worried glance at Lauren. Grace, get on with your duties, Lauren said sharply. I can handle this. Ishurna, but he's all wet. I said, do your job, Lauren practically hissed. Grace reluctantly stepped back, looking apologetically at Jaden. He nodded at her, indicating that everything was okay, and returned to his seat, wet and uncomfortable. I'm so sorry about what happened, sir, she whispered. It was wrong. Thank you, Grace, Jaden replied quietly. I appreciate your kindness. Lauren, noticing the scene from across the room, narrowed her eyes and wrote something down in her notebook, throwing a menacing glance in Grace's direction. Jaden watched this dynamic with growing concern. It was obvious that Lauren was not only discriminating against passengers, but also bullying her coworkers who were trying to do the right thing. By mid-flight, Lauren's attitude toward Jaden had become even more openly hostile. She ignored his requests, forgot to offer him refreshing towels or dessert, and cast disdainful glances every time she passed his seat. Lauren pointedly let Jaden pass while they were handing out customs forms. When he raised his hand to get attention, she pretended not to notice. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough to be heard. "I need a uniform too. We've run out of forms. You'll have to fill it out at the airport." "Young man," she said to Jaden, "you may have one of my forms. I was given two by mistake." "Thank you," Jaden replied with a smile. Lauren pressed her lips together but said nothing, continuing to hand out forms to the other passengers. Jaden noticed that now it was not only Mr. Anderson, but also the other passengers who were beginning to realize the unfairness of what was happening. The whispers in the cabin were becoming more and more distinct. As the plane began its descent to land and the passengers fastened their seatbelts, Jaden felt his seat being nudged slightly from behind. He turned around to see Lauren, who was supposedly checking to make sure the seatbelts were fastened correctly. "Sorry," she said, without a trace of remorse in her voice. "I didn't notice you." That was the last straw. Jaden realized that the situation went beyond simple discrimination. This was outright bullying, and it couldn't continue. After landing, as passengers began to gather their belongings, Jaden noticed Lauren whispering conspiratorially to another flight attendant, occasionally casting mocking glances his way. Grace stood to the side, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. "I hope you will file a complaint about this disgraceful treatment," he said quietly. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable in a decent airline." "Don't worry," Jaden replied with a slight smile. "I'll definitely take care of it. Thank you for flying with us," she said mechanically. "We hope you'll choose us again." Jaden stopped right in front of her. His eyes met hers, and for a moment Lauren felt a sudden sense of unease. Something about this passenger was off. Something about his calm and confidence was unsettling. "I'll definitely be back," Jaden said with a mysterious smile. "Very soon." As he exited the plane, he immediately noticed Michael waiting for him at the exit. "Everything all right, sir?" the assistant asked, noticing the damp spots on Jaden's clothes. "No, Michael, I'm not," Jaden replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I will be soon. Get everything ready for tomorrow's flight. I'm flying with the same crew." "But sir, tomorrow you have a meeting with the board of directors." "Call it off," Jaden said firmly. "What's happening on my planes is more important. I need to see how deep this problem goes." "Are you going to reveal your identity?" "Not yet. First, I want to see how far Lauren Reed will go when she's not confronted. And then," his eyes narrowed, "then it'll be time for the truth." As they exited the terminal, Jaden turned around for a moment, looking at the plane he had just left. His thoughts were dark. Was this the true face of the company he had so proudly created? Were his employees practicing discrimination and bullying instead of equality and respect? Tomorrow he will get a definitive answer. And if his fears are confirmed, Lauren Reed and her kind will have to face the consequences of their actions. Jaden Smith will never allow his name to be associated with injustice and prejudice. Never. At that moment, he spotted Lauren in the distance, coming out of the airport's service entrance. She was laughing on the phone, completely unaware that her career was hanging by a thread. She didn't know that the man she had so scornfully disparaged had the power not just to file a complaint, but to change her life entirely with one decision. Jaden clutched the phone in his hand. One call and everything would change. But he would wait. He would give Lauren Reed one more chance to show her true colors. And then, only then, would she know what a terrible mistake she had made. The morning sun glinted off the glossy surface of the plane as Jaden Smith approached the steps for the third time in 2 days. His plan had reached its climax, and today he was going to see just how far discrimination could go on board his airline. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Michael asked, handing Jaden a boarding pass. "I've received several complaints from passengers on yesterday's flight about the flight attendant's inappropriate behavior. We have enough evidence now. I need to see the full picture with my own eyes. If changes are necessary, they will be fundamental, not cosmetic." Today, Jaden was dressed more simply than before, in regular jeans and a shirt without any expensive brand logos. He looked like an ordinary middle-class passenger, not a successful businessman or celebrity. "What are you planning?" Michael's voice was filled with concern. "I'm going to expose Lauren Reed's true colors," Jaden replied. "Her and everyone else who creates a toxic environment in my company." He headed to the gate, where a line of passengers was already forming. This time, Lauren was standing at the check-in counter with Grace, checking boarding passes. Jaden noticed her making condescending comments about some of the passengers to another flight attendant, unaware that she could be overheard. When it was his turn, Lauren looked at him and her face changed instantly. Recognition, then outright irritation, flashed across her eyes. "You again," she said through clenched teeth, checking his ticket. "I see you're in the economy version today." She cast a disdainful glance at his simple clothes. "I prefer comfort to formality," Jaden replied calmly. Your seat is seat 1A, she said, handing back her ticket. Front row, first class. I'm sure you'll enjoy the flight. There was a threat in her tone, but Jaden just nodded and walked past. He saw Grace give him a worried look, then say something quietly to Lauren. Lauren waved her off and continued working, but her expression was thoughtful, as if she was considering her colleague's warning. The plane was quickly filling up with passengers. Jaden took his seat in the front row, where he could see the entire crew in action. He noticed Mr. Anderson again, who had taken a seat a few rows away. The man nodded at him in greeting, and Jaden nodded back. Welcome aboard, she said mechanically, and quickly turned away without waiting for an answer. The plane began taxiing to the runway. Lauren gave the standard safety briefing, purposely turning her back to Jaden as she demonstrated the oxygen mask and life jacket. After takeoff, she began handing out drinks, lingering at the seats of prominent passengers, and moving quickly past the rest. What for you? She asked sharply. Tomato juice, please, Jaden replied. We're out of tomato juice, Lauren countered, though Jaden could see the open bottle on her cart. In that case, orange, he said calmly. Lauren poured orange juice and placed it in front of Jaden, deliberately filling the glass to the very brim so that the slightest movement would cause the liquid to spill. Enjoy, she said with a fake smile and walked away. Jaden took the glass carefully, trying not to spill the contents. He noticed several passengers watching the scene with growing interest. The story seemed to be spreading. A passenger that the flight attendant somehow disliked. About an hour into the flight, Lauren began handing out the meal menus. She explained the meal options to each passenger in detail, but when she got to Jaden, she simply placed the menu on his table without saying a word. Yes? Her voice dripped with irritation. I'd like to order the steak, medium rare, Jaden said. Unfortunately, we don't have steak today, Lauren replied, even though it was definitely listed on the menu. In that case, I'll take the chicken, Jaden said calmly. We only have a vegetarian option left for you, Lauren snapped. Take it or leave it. Several passengers seated nearby exchanged puzzled glances. An elderly woman sitting across the aisle frowned and whispered something to her companion. Okay, I'll take the vegetarian dish, Jaden agreed, keeping his composure. As the food service began, Jaden noticed how sumptuously the other first-class passengers were served. Steaks, salmon, exotic side dishes, everything looked immaculate. When it was his turn, Lauren placed a plate of sad vegetable stew in front of him, looking like it had been cobbled together from the leftovers of other dishes. Enjoy your meal, she said with barely concealed mockery. This is not what I ordered. It's a vegetarian option, just like you asked, she replied, rolling her eyes. If you don't like it, you can always choose not to eat it. Several passengers were now openly watching this exchange. Mr. Anderson shook his head in obvious disapproval. An elderly couple across the aisle looked at each other with shocked expressions on their faces. I'd like to speak to the chief steward, Jaden said calmly. I am the chief steward of this flight. If you have any complaints, you can send them in writing to the company after landing. And now I would ask you not to create problems for other passengers. The only person causing problems here is you, Jaden said quietly but firmly. Your behavior is unprofessional and discriminatory. How dare you blame me? I'm doing my job. Your job is to provide equal and decent service to all passengers, Jaden countered, not to humiliate those you don't think deserve it. Several passengers nodded approvingly, agreeing with his words. The atmosphere in the cabin became increasingly tense. If you continue this conversation, I will be forced to ask you to move to economy class. On what basis? Jaden asked. I bought a first-class ticket and am entitled to first-class service. On the grounds that you are disturbing the peace of other passengers, Lauren snapped. I have the authority to reseat any passenger if I deem it necessary for the safety and comfort of the flight. It was a blatant lie, and Jaden knew it. Flight attendants had no such authority, especially to move passengers between classes without a good reason. I'm not disturbing anyone's peace, Jaden replied calmly. I'm simply asking for the service I paid for. For the last time, I ask you to move to economy class voluntarily. Otherwise, I will be forced to take action. I'll stay where I am, Jaden said firmly, and I'd like to receive the same service as the other first-class passengers. Lauren turned on her heel and quickly walked to the front of the plane, where she began whispering to the other crew members, occasionally throwing angry glances in Jaden's direction. This is simply outrageous, he said quietly. I have never seen such unprofessional behavior in first grade. You should make a formal complaint. Thank you for your support, Jaden replied with a slight smile. Don't worry, I'll definitely take care of this situation. Young man, I recorded everything on my phone. If you need a witness, I am ready to confirm her disgusting behavior. I appreciate your support, ma'am. The atmosphere in the cabin became tense. Passengers began to openly discuss what was happening, many expressing outrage at Lauren's behavior. Some even took out their phones preparing to record further developments. Lauren returned, her face red with anger, with Grace walking next to her, looking extremely worried. I'm asking you for the last time to move to economy class, Lauren demanded, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. In that case, I'm calling security, Lauren said. They'll meet us when we land. Lauren, maybe we should just... Shut up, Lauren barked. I'm the one making the decisions here. The cabin fell into shocked silence. Several passengers began filming the scene on their phones. News of the conflict spread throughout the plane, and even economy-class passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. You are crossing all boundaries of professional behavior. I am not moving, and if you call security, you will have to explain to them why you are discriminating against a passenger without any reason. People like you always think you deserve special treatment, but on my plane, I decide who's worth what. This isn't your plane, Jaden replied calmly, and your behavior is unworthy of the uniform you wear. Something in his tone, the certainty of his words, made Lauren hesitate for a moment, but then her anger returned with renewed vigor. You know nothing, she hissed. I've been working for this company for 10 years. I've earned my position, and people like you think you can buy respect with money. Respect can't be bought, Jaden replied. It's earned by how you treat people, and judging by your behavior, you clearly haven't earned it. Get out of here, she practically screamed, pointing towards economy class. I won't let you stay in first class. I'm not going anywhere, Jaden said firmly. You don't have the authority to make me change my location. Please, let's just calm down and... But Lauren wasn't listening. In a moment of blind rage, she did something no one expected. She raised her hand and slapped Jaden hard across the face. You just made a serious mistake, he said quietly, but every word rang in the air like metal. Lauren froze, suddenly realizing what she had done. The color drained from her face, leaving it pale and scared. She had just punched a passenger in front of dozens of witnesses, many of whom were recording the incident on their phones. Grace clapped her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The other flight attendants froze, unsure of what to do. This is Jaden Smith, he said into the phone. I need an unscheduled landing for SA-175. Yes, immediately, and send security to the ramp. At the sound of his name, Lauren's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. She took a step back, her hands starting to shake. Smith, she muttered. How? Also inform the captain that I am on board and that this is an order from the owner of the company. Lauren looked like she was about to faint, her face ashen, her arms hanging limply at her sides. It's impossible, she whispered. You can't be... Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to technical reasons, we are making an unscheduled landing at the nearest airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The plane began to descend. Lauren stood still as a statue, her world crumbling before her eyes. She had just punched the owner of the company she had worked for 10 years, the man who could destroy her career with one word. Mr. Smith, I didn't know, she muttered, her voice shaking. I tried. I know, Grace, Jaden replied softly. This situation isn't your fault. In fact, you were the only person on this crew who tried to do the right thing. Mr. Smith, I didn't understand. This is a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? You systematically discriminated against a passenger based on his appearance. You refused to provide the service to which he was entitled. You bullied colleagues who were trying to do the right thing. And finally, you physically assaulted a man, thinking you could get away with it. This is not a misunderstanding, Ms. Reed. This is a complete professional failure. The passengers around them began to applaud, some shouting out encouraging comments, others continuing to film everything on their phones. I can explain, Lauren began, but Jaden raised his hand, stopping her. This is not the time for explanations, he said. You will have a chance to speak before the board of directors, unless, of course, it goes to trial for assault. Lauren paled even more, if that was even possible. She stepped back, looking to the other flight attendants for support, but they turned away, not wanting to be associated with her. Michael, meet me at the ramp and bring security with you. We've had an incident. Lauren sank slowly into a seat in the back, her body going limp as if all the air had been sucked out of her. She knew her career was over. In fact, she could face criminal charges for assault, all because of her prejudice and arrogance. As the plane touched down, a tense silence fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged excited glances, realizing that they had witnessed an extraordinary event. No one moved from their seats, waiting for the denouement of the drama. Jaden remained calm, his face showing no triumph or malice, only determination. He waited until the plane came to a complete stop, then stood up and walked over to Lauren, who was cowering in her seat. Ms. Reed, he said quietly, but loud enough for the others to hear. I built this company from the ground up on the principles of equality and respect. I will never allow my name to be associated with discrimination and prejudice. Today, you have not just disgraced yourself, you have disgraced everything Smith Air stands for. The plane's doors opened and two of Jaden's suited assistants boarded, followed by airport security officers. "Mr. Smith," said one of the assistants, "everything is ready for your disposal. This person," he pointed at Lauren, "physically assaulted me in front of dozens of witnesses. Many passengers have video footage of the incident. I demand her immediate arrest." "Ma'am, you'll have to come with us. Please, Mr. Smith. I didn't know. I didn't understand." "That's the problem, Ms. Reed," Jaden said firmly. "You shouldn't have treated anyone like that, no matter if they were the owner of the company or just a passenger. Every person deserves respect simply because they're human." The security officers took Lauren by the arms and led her to the exit. The passengers began to applaud. Some even stood up from their seats, expressing support for Jaden's actions. "Thank you for your work, Grace, for trying to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy." "Thank you, Mr. Smith," she whispered. "I was just doing my job." "And they did it well," Jaden said, "unlike some people." "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this incident and the delay caused. As the owner of Smith Air, I personally guarantee that each of you will be compensated for the inconvenience. But more importantly, I promise that such an incident will never happen again on board my aircraft." "My admiration, Mr. Smith. What you did today is real leadership. Young man, you remind me that justice still exists in this world." Jaden nodded to them both, then turned toward the exit, where his aides were waiting. Lauren had already been escorted off the plane, but the battle for the soul of the company was just beginning. Today, he had seen how deeply prejudice and discrimination could run, even in an organization built on the principles of equality. As he exited the plane, Jaden noticed Michael waiting for him at the steps, next to a black SUV. The assistant's face showed concern mixed with respect. "You really did it," Michael said as Jaden came down. "You let her get this far." "Sometimes you have to see a problem in all its ugly fullness before you can solve it," Jaden replied, "and I've seen enough today." He looked back at the plane, his plane, which had somehow become a place of discrimination and inequality. Everything he had always fought against. "What now?" Michael asked. Now we change everything, from the bottom to the top, and this is just the beginning." Blinding flashes of cameras lit up the airport conference room where Jaden Smith, dressed immaculately in a Navy suit, stood before a makeshift podium. News that the 26-year-old owner of Smith Air had personally investigated discrimination on his planes had spread like wildfire across social media. Dozens of journalists had gathered within hours, hungry for details of the scandal. At the back of the room, Lauren, her face white and her hands cuffed behind her back, was being watched by two security officers. Her perfectly pressed uniform was now rumpled, and strands of hair had fallen out of her neat hairstyle. "All passengers on the flight have arrived as requested. Video footage has been collected. Police officers are awaiting your instructions regarding Ms. Reed." Jaden nodded, his face unreadable. He glanced around at the assembled journalists and passengers, then looked at Lauren. Their eyes met briefly, and she quickly looked away, unable to withstand his intense gaze. "Good morning. I'm Jaden Smith, owner and CEO of Smith Air." His voice was clear and confident. "Over the past 2 days, I have personally witnessed flagrant violations of our company policies that go against every principle on which Smith Air was founded." The hall fell silent. The journalists froze with their cameras and tape recorders raised. "I purposely traveled incognito to experience firsthand the quality of service our customers receive. What I found shocked me to the core." Jaden paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Discrimination and prejudice have flourished on board my aircraft. Passengers have been humiliated solely because of their appearance or perceived social status. This is a disgrace that I cannot and will not tolerate." A whisper ran through the room. The cameras clicked with redoubled intensity. "I would like to invite to the microphone Grace Parker, a flight attendant who demonstrated the true values of Smith Air, even in the most difficult circumstances." Grace stepped forward hesitantly, her hands shaking slightly. She was dressed in her uniform, but she looked pale and clearly nervous. "Miss Parker," Jaden continued, "as of today, you are appointed chief steward of our company, with authority to completely restructure the training programs for service personnel." "But, Mr. Smith, I've only been working here for a year." "Exactly. And in this 1 year, you've demonstrated more professionalism, humanity, and integrity than some employees have in decades of service," Jaden said firmly. "Smith Air needs people who value respect for every person." Applause swept through the room. Grace, with tears in her eyes, nodded and stepped back. "Please bring Miss Reed." The officers led Lauren to the stand. She stood up straight, but there was undisguised fear in her eyes. Miss Reed, Jaden said to her, his voice deceptively calm, you've been with my company for 10 years. During that time, you've risen to the position of senior steward. What are your responsibilities? To ensure the safety and comfort of passengers. And did you treat all passengers equally? I tried. Don't lie, Ms. Reed, Jaden interrupted sharply. There are dozens of witnesses to your behavior in this room. We have video footage that shows systematic discrimination against passengers based on their appearance. Let's watch a few episodes. A murmur of indignation swept through the room. Several journalists shook their heads, others scribbled quickly in their notebooks. Ms. Reed, Jaden continued as the video ended, you struck a passenger who was merely asking for equal treatment. How do you explain your actions? You provoked me. You set this all up on purpose to set me up. I was behaving like a normal passenger. I was asking for what I had every right to ask for. The fact that you perceive normal human requests as provocation speaks to a much deeper problem, Ms. Reed. Let me be clear for everyone here. I did not set up Ms. Reed. I simply took a seat on the plane for which I had paid and expected service that met Smith Air standards. What I received was systematic discrimination based solely on prejudice and assumptions about my status. Everyone does it. Do you think I'm the only one? Every airline has an unspoken rule. VIP clients get the best service. Everyone else gets the last one. I just did what I was taught. There was a dead silence in the room. Jaden looked at Lauren carefully, giving her a chance to continue. Who exactly told you that? Jaden asked, his voice icy. Everyone, supervisors, trainers, flight directors. Lauren almost screamed. It's an unwritten rule. If you want to punish me, you'll have to punish half the company. Write down all the names she gives. Anyone involved in this practice will be suspended from work until the investigation is completed. Go on, Miss Reed. I want to hear everything. Realizing she had nothing to lose, Lauren began rattling off names and departments where she said this practice was the norm. The reporters frantically took down every word. Some of the Smith Air employees present turned pale when they heard their names. I created Smith Air with one goal in mind, to provide exceptional service to every passenger. Not a select few, not the important, but every single person who trusted us with their travel. What I learned today deeply disappoints me and demands immediate action. Ms. Reed, your behavior is inexcusable, no matter what others have told you. Each person is personally responsible for their actions. Lauren Reed, you are dismissed from Smith Air, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am personally filing a charge of assault against you. You will have an opportunity to explain yourself in court. Miss Reed, you are under arrest on charges of assault. One of the officers read her rights while the other removed the handcuffs to replace them with his own. You can't do this to me, Lauren cried as she was escorted out of the room. I gave 10 years of my life to this company. And in those 10 years, you haven't learned the most important thing, Jaden replied. Respect isn't determined by the price of someone's suit or watch. It's determined by how you treat people, especially those you don't expect anything from. Today, I am announcing major changes at Smith Air. First, a complete restructuring of our training programs to emphasize equal treatment for all passengers. Second, the introduction of a system of anonymous service quality reviews that will be conducted regularly and without warning. Thirdly, and most importantly, we are creating a system of protection for employees who report cases of discrimination and inappropriate behavior. No one should be afraid of losing their job because they are doing the right thing. Ms. Parker, I am appointing you to chair a task force to transform the corporate culture at Smith Air. You have demonstrated character and integrity under the most difficult circumstances. These are the qualities that are needed to drive real change. I won't let you down, Mr. Smith. Smith Air acknowledges its mistakes and takes full responsibility for what happened. We will not hide behind corporate statements or vague promises. We acknowledge the problem and are determined to fix it. These people witnessed discrimination on board our aircraft. I offer them my deepest apologies. Each of them will receive full compensation for emotional distress and a lifetime right to free flights on Smith Air. Passengers applauded, many looking touched by the decision. The hall burst into applause. Journalists, usually cynical and reserved, also joined in the ovation. You have a lot of work ahead of you, Miss Parker. Are you ready? More than ready, Mr. Smith. What happened on that flight? It happens all the time. It's just that usually no one sees it. I've wanted to change something for a long time, but I didn't know how. You have an opportunity now, Jaden said. Use it wisely. After the conference, Jaden and Michael headed towards the airport exit. At the door, they were stopped by an elderly couple, the same passengers from the flight. Mr. Smith, the woman said, my husband and I would like to thank you for what you have done. We have been flying all our lives, and we have seen how people like Lauren treat those they deem not important enough. What you have done today gives us hope. Thank you for your support. Smith Air will change, I promise. Do you really think you can change the entire company? There are thousands of employees, decades of established practice. I don't think so, Michael. I know, because there's no alternative. If we can't treat everyone with the same respect, then what's the point of everything we do? Mr. Smith, last question. What do you say to the critics who claim that you used Lauren Reed as a model victim to create an image of yourself as a fighter for justice? With these words, he got into the car and closed the door, leaving the journalists surrounded by camera flashes. As the car pulled away, Jaden closed his eyes for a moment. It had been a grueling day, but he knew the real work was just beginning. Changing a company's culture was a marathon, not a sprint. But after what he'd seen on board his plane, there was no turning back. His phone vibrated. It was his father calling. "Hey, Dad," Jaden replied. "Just saw you all over the news, son." Will Smith's voice was proud. "You did the right thing. That's why we started this company." "I know, Dad. I just can't believe this was happening under our noses this whole time." "Now you've seen it. Now you can change it," Will said. "That's the difference between a manager and a real leader." Jaden looked out the window at the airport passing by, where he had just been an unimportant passenger not long ago. "I won't stop until I get it right," he promised. "Everyone deserves equal respect, and I'm going to make sure Smith Air is a company where that's not just talk." The TV in the car showed a live feed of the press conference. Footage of Lauren Reed being let out in handcuffs gave way to a close-up of Jaden's face, heralding a new era for Smith Air. On social media, the hashtag #RechercheEqualityAtHigh has already gone viral, with thousands of people sharing their stories of discrimination on flights and their own experiences with Lorenas in various service areas. You just started a movement, boss. People are coming out of the shadows telling their stories. This is much bigger than just an internal reform of Smith Air. That's exactly what I wanted, because the problem is much bigger than one airline or one flight attendant. It's about how we treat each other as a society. Jaden stepped out of the car, the air filled with applause and cheers. Among those greeting him, he noticed Grace, who had already begun her new duties. She stood surrounded by a group of flight attendants who listened attentively to her words. "You've set a precedent," Michael said as they walked toward the building's entrance. "Now every company in the country will be forced to think about its equality policies." "This is just the beginning," Jaden replied, his eyes blazing with determination. "Real change requires sustained effort, and I'm willing to put in the work, no matter how long it takes." He smiled and put the phone in his pocket. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just doing what any person faced with injustice had to do. And this was only the beginning of his journey.